Good evening, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the 24-hour conference on global organized crime. My name is Mauricio Vieira. I am the head of the chair on countering illicit trade and preventing transnational organized crime at the University for Peace. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the panel Landscape in Latin America of Interinstitutional Cooperation Against Illicit Trade. Are we reaching a positive goal? For this panel, it is my pleasure to welcome three guests of honor and friends that together collaborate to enhance an agenda centered on the public-private partnership with the cooperation of academia and civil society. This panel will be an interactive discussion with the Brigadier General Juan Carlos Buitrago of the National Police of Colombia, where he worked for 33 years. Security specialist, auditor from the Business Alliance for Security Commerce, BASC, and the founder and CEO at Strategos BIP. Claudette Vermont is a lawyer with a career centered on the study and on the improvement of brand protection programs and IP litigation strategies in Colombia. She is the founder of Estrategia Jurídica. And Victor Hugo Guerra, lawyer and senior counsel on illicit trade prevention for Latin America and Caribbean and the USA at Philip Morris International, and board member of the International Chamber of Commerce Institute for World Business Law. Let's start our conversation with the main concept of the panel, which is interinstitutional cooperation against illicit trade. Now, Claudette, how can interinstitutional cooperation, both regionally and internationally, support the countering of illicit trade? Welcome to the conference.
Thank you, Mauricio, and good evening for everyone. First of all, I would like to note that besides being a lawyer at Estrategia Jurídica and CEO, I'm also representing INTA, which is the International Trademark Association. And I'm the chair of the Anti-Counterfeiting Committee, which is a committee that has currently 350 members covering 9 jurisdictions. So it is important to note that currently the fight against counterfeiting and contraband involves several holders. In the past, we used to have one scenario with one brand holder on one side and the law enforcement on the other side. Nowadays, we have multiple stakeholders fighting this battle. Therefore, through our members in INTA and through the association, we fight this illegal crime through the Global Association of Brand Owners and Professionals that are dedicated to supporting brands and also to foster consumer trust, economic growth, and innovation, all committed to building a better society through brands. Our members work in different jurisdictions, and mainly in Colombia, we are working on best practices and also training law enforcement and different authorities in this battle against counterfeiting and contraband. We were very close also with different entities and agencies that deal with these criminal offenses. We look always for international cooperation and coordination of legal strategies that can fight this criminal organization. For example, as lawyers in the Latin American region, we receive most of the time, several information of specific containers that cannot be stopped in one specific region, for example, because the legislation doesn't allow to stop containers in transit. The collaboration among authorities and different international agencies have helped brand owners to stop those containers when they arrive to a different port. The brand, we have to insist that the brand holders stays. They don't intervene as an isolated island, and they have all the support of associations such as INTA, law enforcement, and international agencies that work all together to fight this illegal trade. This international association has a purpose to protect and promote the rights of trademark owners, to secure useful legislation, and to give aid and encouragement to all efforts for the advancement and observance of trademark rights. that will be my opinion on that particular question.
Thank you very much, Claudette. And a very interesting point you raised about protection and security. And Victor, what are the key international legal mechanisms or instruments that have proven effective in addressing illicit trade? Welcome to the conference.
Thank you very much, Mauricio, and it's an honor to be here, a real pleasure to share this virtual conference, an excellent initiative, and I would like just to say that how important is to connect the prevention, the countering against illicit trade with transnational crime. Therefore, I celebrate bigly this initiative. I would like to be very concrete here and mention the audience three specific instruments at the multilateral system that are for me key in the fighting against illicit trade. The first one in this region is the efforts conducted by the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, Parlatino, in Panama. The Parlatino is a legislative body for the region, and they have the mission to draft model laws. In that regards, they actually did it in 2021 with a law to counter illicit trade and transnational crime, also a model law regarding the extinction or forfeiture of illicit assets, and also a model law to counter cybercrime. So for the audience, it's important to take a look on the Parlatino regulatory work. The second example that I would like to provide the audience will be the OECD. The OECD has a dedicated task force to actually assess the illicit flagellum, but also a task force that produce different recommendations and best practices, including code of conduct. For example, in 2019, they actually approved a set of recommendations to ensure transparency at the free trade zones. It is an excellent example on how to promote precisely this countering against the illicit phenomena. In the region, and we need to say so, we have Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Chile as an active members of the OECD. So this is my second example. And my third example will be a very important instrument that has been approved under the umbrella of the Health World Organization. I'm talking about the protocol to fight or to eliminate the illicit trade on tobacco products. Of course, I'm here from the tobacco industry, and for me, that protocol is absolutely instrumental in regards to the fight at the international level, at the regulatory level against the illicit trade. Very importantly, is not only to have, and I will conclude with this, is not only to have the instruments, right? The legal instruments, actually how the government, how the states will implement and enforce those regulations. That's key, because we might have beautiful laws, but if those laws are not implemented properly, then we're going to have a big issue in the enforcement. We're going to have the authorities asking us, how can we actually address the illicit issue if we don't know how to implement those international instruments? Therefore, should be a real connection between the paper and the reality. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Victor, for this opportunity to bring the contribution of a Parlatino as a part of a regional perspective for multidimensional approach on the fight against illicit trade. And now I pass the floor to the Brigadier General Buitrago. In your opinion, for an interinstitutional collaboration to be successful, what are the key factors or strategies needed? Is it possible to think about replicating them in other countries and regions? Welcome to the conference. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mauricio. It's a pleasure to be here in this interesting panel with my colleagues, Claudette and Victor. And yes, answering your question, yes, is it possible to replicate these interesting experiences in other regions and countries? But before talking about the strategies, I could say that there are two conditions to develop successful collaboration. First, shared goal. This means that independently, if we are talking about a Mexican businessman, a Colombian officer, an academic from Brazil, and so on, we can solidly affirm that preventing and combating illicit trade is paramount, is good, and that we can do something toward this mission. The second condition is trust. A trust is something unique that advances together with the personal and professional relationships built while pursuing a common goal, like having a society and economy free of violence and crimes. Then I want to start talking about strategies. And I like a framework used by different organizations like Interpol, for instance, called the 4Ps. This means prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. The 4Ps framework helps us think through designing effective and impactful solutions to address illicit trafficking. This means to prevent all ways of illicit trafficking, protect and assist its victims, prosecute its perpetrators, and strengthen partnerships. So this is my opinion, and I think that it is possible to replicate a good cooperation in other countries and in the regions. Thank you, Mauricio, for your question.
Thank you, General Buitrago. And I just want to continue this conversation, this dialogue with you, because when we think about specifically these four main topics that you mentioned about Interpol, prevention, protection, partnership, and prosecution, I think that this is also a perspective on how to bring an innovative approach for this interinstitutional cooperation against illicit trade. And now my question, General Buitrago, is for you is, could you share some examples of successful public-private partnerships in the region that have effectively contributed to the countering of illicit trade?
Yes, Mauricio, I can share some experiences with the audience. For instance, in the last months, I'm working together with, for instance, CODECOF. CODECOF in Guatemala is one of the institutions that it's an initiative of the private sector, but it works in a very good and close way with public sector. And they are preventing and combating illicit trade in a very well way. But also we have, for instance, the Latin America Alliance to Prevent and Combat Illicit Trade, which is an initiative that have developed by the National Association of Industries in Colombia, which name is ANDI. And this initiative, as I mentioned, ALAC, has been a very nice initiative in order to work preventing and combating illicit trade. And of course, I would like to mention the Regional Public and Private Alliance, known as COEPA, an acronym for Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama, which all of you, all the participants in this panel, Victor, Claudette, and Mauricio, already known and part of this successful case. The COEPA Alliance has distinguished for its spirit based on offer reduction strategies, besides demand-side solutions, and also because it uses technology like CIMA, that is the Center for Investigating and Monitoring and Analyze Illicit Trade, and it has been a successful technology because was made in order to improve the information sharing between private sector and public officers.
Thank you.
Issue.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, General Buitrago. Very interesting to mention the initiative of COEPA, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama that was recently launched last year, and that makes use of the technology in the fight against illicit trade. This is a very important advancement to mention as part of this successful example. And now, Claudette, are there specific case studies or success stories that highlight innovative strategies, approaches to combat counterfeiting in the region?
Yes, Mauricio, and I think taking into consideration what the General just mentioned, and you mentioned about COEPA and this alliance between Colombia and Panama, it's important to note that in an event that we had with different authorities from these three countries, we were presenting one huge case that we had about contraband of cigarettes. And it was very interesting to know that the authorities from Ecuador were having also one particular case of those persons that were investigated. So this is, this is innovative. This is the way that we put collaboration together. And why we do that? Because your question is how we do innovation strategies to approach and fight against illegal trade. And we have to do this because we know that smugglers and counterfeiters are innovating all the time. So that put associations, lawyers, companies, agencies to all the time trying to find ways to find the main roads of these counterfeiters. We know, for example, that in Colombia, there is a lot of changes through the sea. And sometimes that we are not just waiting for huge containers, but small boats with the merchandise. And that applies to all industries. So I think that the innovation part of CIMA or Strategos strategy is to put together different industries working together. We cannot think of just one industry working isolated. We need all industries, we need different brand holders, because we are all hurting, all having big problems with the illegal trade. So just collaboration as a strategy should be the main goal for all the stakeholders involved in this fight against illegal trade.
Thank you, Claudette. Very interesting point that you raised about industries must work together as part of this collaboration strategy. And Victor, how can legal frameworks and collaborative efforts be adapted to address the new challenges posed by counterfeiters?
Thank you, Mauricio. Look, I can tell you that that is for us. Can you hear me well? Super.
Yes.
There is a common saying in the legal environment that the law is always behind reality. In other words, we try to adapt every day to the societies, to the needs of the societies. But it is true that by the time that we approve new laws, those laws are already behind new realities. Criminal actors, because they are precisely acting outside the law, they have a capability to adapt very, very quickly, very easily. They migrate from one market to another market. Even, for example, if they are in one of our markets in Colombia, and the law enforcement are trying to get them at the north of the country, well, they will move to the south. If the criminal organizations are actually very rapidly adapting to the needs of the consumers, I will say as well. We have this experience during the COVID. During the COVID, when you assess a criminal enterprise, you can see that the criminal enterprise as a company has different divisions and they have a portfolio of brands and products. So for example, during the COVID, they decided, no, what is needed in the society are the personal protection equipment, the mask, the vaccines, etc. So those criminal organizations were doing so. In my case, in the case of the tobacco industry, I can tell you that there is an appetite for this type of products because, of course, they are easily to storage in a container, 20 feet or 40 feet, and they can come from Asia through Panama and actually flow around the region in an easy way. But that's a story I can tell you, at least from my experience in the legal arena, that when I was working with the Par Latino, for example, I used the technology. I used the technology to conduct my comparative law assessment. So for me, it was easy to use the technology, for example, to see what is happening at the multilateral system, what is happening in Dominican Republic, what is happening in Costa Rica, and to put together, for the Par Latino review and final approval, a model law. But also the criminal organizations abuse, and you are an expert on this, Mauricio, because you have been written about the abuse of the state fragility and how the criminal organizations actually abuse of the fragility of the states. They also abuse of the technology. And working, for example, with General Buitrago, we have been discussing many times, for example, the new trends on how to use cryptocurrencies as a way to bypass the law enforcement monitoring. So somehow something that might be technologically super nice and super useful for the growth of the society is actually abused or has been abused by the criminal orgs to get the secrecy or abuse about the anonymity or the decentralization of cryptocurrencies in order to conduct the criminal activity. So, it's a permanent game, Mauricio and the audience, against the criminal organization. If I can conclude this second part of my intervention, I will say the following. Criminal organizations are fast, they are dynamic, they migrate from one to another activity, and therefore they demand from us who are in the legal sector to work together with the public sector to ensure that we support the public sector in appropriate regulations, to ensure that we actually participate in open dialogues regarding this type of things, in order to be a real legal group to fight the dynamic of the criminal organization. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Victor. Very interesting points you raised about this adaptability condition of the criminal organizations. And I think that we must look at this as a global conference on organized crime, and experts from different fields, but with the main umbrella area of organized crime are watching us, and they can also interact with our conversations with questions in the Q&A section. But what you mentioned, Victor, about this adaptability condition of the criminal organizations is very important, because this requires from all of us and for all organizations that work to fight illicit economies and organized crime, a cooperation on sharing information, which is essential for providing more effectiveness to these strategies. And what you mentioned about state fragility, we just had a panel on this conference about the recently book launched on global approaches on state fragility and organized crime, in a sense that all countries in the world, they have and they face a level of fragility, which means that controlling borders, not sharing information. So if we see the criminal organizations spreading and perpetuating and proliferating their activities is because there is a fragility taking place in globally. And Victor, I just want to continue with you, and because we had a conversation on interinstitutional cooperation against illicit trade and innovation, and now we can also bring another topic of this panel, that is the landscape in Latin America, which is one of the issues that we must discuss. And how can legal frameworks effectively address the cross-border nature of illicit trade in Latin America?
This is a fantastic question, but before I answer the question, I would like just to reinforce that not everything is so bad from the legal systems. We can quote, for example, super recent cases on the regulatory arena in the United States regarding the regulation of online marketplaces. This is a topic that I have been working with Claudette, the INTA, and the idea to actually promote this type of, in the case of the United States, the so-called Uniform Consumers Act. That is actually a regulation that entered into effect in June this year to promote know your customer, transparency, etc., at the online marketplaces level, even giving the authority to the Federal Trade Commission to impose fines, not small fines, I will say. We're talking about $50,000 or more to marketplaces that actually not follow this law in order to ensure transparency and the fight against illicit trade. If we go to the EU, for example, you will have the Digital Services Act and the Marketing Services Act. So there are efforts, Mauricio, in the regulatory arena. Parlatino, again, is a fantastic example for me in this region. Parlatino in 2021 approved these 3 model laws that are actually an example. It is important to say to the audience, they are not mandatory immediately. They need to be adopted by the state members or other states that are no members, but they might replicate the efforts of the model law from the Parlatino. We have concrete examples already in Ecuador, right after the approval of the Parlatino model law. Ecuador, who in the case of my industry, is a market that we have an incidence of illicit trade around 80% of the cigarettes that are consumed in Ecuador are illicit, imagine. But Ecuador did, in 2021, their first law against illicit trade, actually based on the Parlatino model law. And the Parlatino model law is also influencing the review and potential amendments of the customs law in Guatemala, in Costa Rica, the contraband law in Colombia, etc. So as you are asking me, how can we address effectively this cross-border issue? It's exactly that. It's because it's a cross-border, it's a transnational situation. We cannot isolate it as Colombia or as Panama or as Costa Rica, fight isolated, as I said, against the phenomenon. Because the phenomenon is actually, if you look at the flow will come, for example, from Asia. You will have Cambodia, Vietnam, South Korea, India, China, right, manufacturing all these products. All these products, goes, and they don't go, as I always say on my conferences, they don't go on pirate boats. They actually abuse of the formal legal shipping lines that actually cross all the ocean, all the planet, through Panama Colón Free Trade Zone, the 3rd most important free trade zone in this region, and from there, spread the illicit products. So a cross-border phenomenon necessarily needs the collaboration in a transnational level. So I need to have a conversation between or among the Panamanian customs, with the Ecuadorian customs, with the Colombian customs, and among them with other authorities. That's precisely what General Huitrago was saying about this public-private alliance, COEPA. COEPA is actually promoting this interaction between legal players that need to communicate among them, because, and we are facing nowadays, and I can give very quickly this example, we are facing nowadays a situation that was a situation meaning a cease of illicit tobacco products in Ecuador, but they were not produced in Ecuador. They were produced in South Korea. they travel all the way through South Korea to Panama Free Trade Zone, Colón Free Trade Zone. In Panama, they did what they need to do in order to ensure that those containers, were from Panama, then through Colombia, and ended up being seized in Ecuador. Again, it's a cross-function, it's a cross-border, it's a transnational situation. When you see the efforts of the United Nations, when you see, for example, the efforts of the UN OECD, when you see the efforts of the OECD, when you see the efforts of Ameripol, Interpol, etc., again, those are organizations that show you the needs about this international cooperation, I would say. I stop here.
Thank you very much,
You're
Victor. Very interesting to bring and to mention the role of the UN, the OECD in these collaboration effort transnationally. And General Buitrago, is there an understanding that Latin America needs funding allocation to counter organized crime and illicit trade?
Mauricio, absolutely. And I will highlight that besides allocate more resources from, let's say, international cooperation, legal national systems within Latin America need to be improved in order to seize more goods from criminal actors, extinguish their property, and reallocate them to law enforcement and for victim protection. Colombia is a great example of how to improve the legislation. In this sense, indeed, the specialized unit at the Attorney General Office that prosecutes money laundering and illicit trade is financially sustainable by its own. It's not easy to do it, but our legislation allows that, and it has been successful. This means it recovers more funds than what this unit requires to operate. On the other hand, we see countries like Mexico, for instance, where the Attorney General Office just won 10 cases of extinction of ownership in 2019. A necessary step to increase funds is improving the way we recover goods and money from the criminal actors. Besides enhancing law enforcement capabilities, it also disrupts the financial muscle of this criminal organization. And just to finish my answer, I would like to point out about what Victor mentioned. I was responsible as Director of Fiscal and Custom Police to control the border, and totally agree with what Victor mentioned in this sense. During this fighting, we dismantled 92 criminal organizations linked with illicit trades, 25 of them international criminal organizations linked specifically with illicit trades in the region. So it's not easy to have a good cooperation between countries, among countries, because sometimes it's more difficult to put together on the same table the authorities in the same country. Imagine to put together on the same table different authorities from different countries. It's more difficult. That's why we are trying to do the best with COEPA, that we try to have the best practice in order to put together private and public sector cooperating against illicit trade.
Thank you, General Buitrago. And what you mentioned about best practices is very important because it reminds us what are the lessons learned from all these corporations and all these opportunities that countries and organizations face. Now, Claudette, how does illicit trade affect brand reputation, consumer trust, and overall business operations?
Well, I think we have been evaluating how the governments in one part, they lose money and they lose taxes for all this criminal activity. And on the other side of the balance, we will always have brand holders. We have the consumer that will be also affected, but for all this illegal trade. So all this explosion of counterfeiting on internet to platforms, social media, Instagram, Facebook, among others, you can find all kinds of products. I mean, you can start with pharma products, luxury brands, alcohol, tobacco, and it's incredible. I mean, you can find whatever you want as a consumer. The question is how we can protect as brands the consumer. So it becomes like one of the main goals of the brand holders, and it's how you can protect the consumer from all these criminal activities and how you can secure that the consumer knows and distinguish how to buy one genuine product from a counterfeit. So I think that lately, I mean, there's a huge trend of brands working on the education of the consumers, so they can distinguish how to buy a genuine product. Also, I think the brands also understand the need for the different institutions and law enforcement to understand that the brand reputation is also very important for them. Think about those products that are on the pharma industry, for example. And if the companies don't take serious campaign of awareness of how to educate the consumer to distinguish the product, it will be a serious consequences for not informing what's going on in their different jurisdictions. So preventive measures and legal actions to find the criminal organizations that are behind all these activities and illegal transportation of products is a must of not only the brands, but also from the different agencies. And of course, like I said since the beginning, the governments lose a lot of money. The brand's reputation can also lose a lot regarding the reputation, the position on the market. And at the end, the consumer will be confused and will say, is the brand doing something? Is the brand protecting the consumer? Or is the consumer an isolated entity, organization that brands are not interested? So I think more and more brands understand that consumer is the most important. It's more important than the business, because only one consumer hurt can destroy business. And I think we all have very serious example of how the reputation of a brand can destroy business. So I think, yes, this is a very serious problem. Also, the platforms start to take conscience of that, and they start to do awareness campaign to the consumer on how to distinguish product, on how you can have to check the origin of the buyer in order to see if you are really buying a genuine product or you have indicia of fake products. So I think the complete education of the consumer will certainly stop the brands from losing the goodwill.
Thank you very much, Claudette. It is very interesting what you mentioned, because I remember one of the webinars that we organized at the University for Peace as part of the chair here, that one of the judges in Panama mentioned this triangle relationship between state, industry, and society, and that we have to look at this triangle relationship, that each actor involved that belongs to this triangle are impacted at some point by illicit economies and organized crime. And other aspect that you mentioned, it is very interesting to link with other conventions that we can give some examples. We are talking about organized crime, and then there is a United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime. But then we didn't mention here, but it is important to bring the element of corruption and how these disrupt this and proliferate illicit economies and organized crime. Then we have also United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime dealing with this topic. And you all mentioned, Claudette, the online platforms. And now we are also having a discussion with, I have here the name because it's a huge name, ad hoc committee to elaborate a comprehensive convention on countering the use of information and communications technology for criminal purposes, which means that this brings more or evidence on this topic that we are discussing nowadays. And I want to continue with you, Claudette, because mentioning working on the interinstitutional cooperation against illicit trade requires an understanding of how to design and implement a multidimensional agenda for addressing this topic. And could you share, Claudette, some examples of successful training programs that have led to more effective law enforcement against illegal trade? And how can civil society contribute to this process?
Yes, Mauricio, I think that the training and the awareness campaigns will be the main objective, not only for the civil society, but also for governments. For example, in Colombia particularly, you see that an entity as the police, customs police, is training different sectors and industry in the different commerce of how to distinguish one genuine drug from a fake one. So at the beginning, we thought that the training should be only done and focus in authorities. But then you see that the training should be also explored and to the civil society. So the question is why the customs police is training me as a consumer on how to distinguish a product. Because I think as agency, they have a responsibility. As protection, for example, the security of the civil citizen, the police has to protect the citizen. So the brand has to protect the consumer, but also the authorities have to protect the consumer. So if you think in general terms, is security, protection, and how all these stakeholders have to worry about the consumer. If you think in the past, I mean, they didn't care about the consumer. I mean, they were saying, okay, we will try to comply with the guarantee of the product. Why the police will be affected if someone is going to buy like fake alcohol or fake cigarettes. But now the mentality has changed completely, and it's good because everyone wins. I mean, the state wins because they seize product, the consumer is protected, and they will be refrained from buying fake product, and the brand holders will keep the goodwill, the reputation, and the good service of the product. So I think that these are a good example of trainings when you involve all the stakeholders, all the society, and all the person that can be affected for illegal activities like contraband, counterfeiting.
Thank you very much, Claudette. And General Buitrago, how can technology foster multidisciplinary collaboration within a public-private partnership?
Thank you, Mauricio. I think that technology changes our lives in many ways. Technology is what makes possible this virtual conversation, for instance. For me, it's unthinkable to improve law enforcement without technology. Just imagine this. How can we improve track and tracing of products without technology? Or counterfeit detection in parcels, or risk profiling by our customs authorities, or monitoring illicit goods in the cyberspace without technology. Of course, technology is also in the most basic parts of resources needed to combat illicit trade, like giving, for instance, a computer to every prosecutor. Inspired by the potential of technology, Strategic VIP developed our own software known as CIMA, through which we can monitor, investigate, and analyze illicit trade incidents of every type of products. CIMA enhances the collaboration between different stakeholders in strategic senses. First, we can gather more data, improve this quality, and easily provide reports and communicate with authorities our findings. That's why we are working on this way with COEPA, the alliance that we already mentioned. That's it, Mauricio.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General Buitrago. And Victor, what emerging trends do you identify in the evolution of international law to combat transnational illicit trade?
Thank you, Mauricio. And has been so interesting listening my colleagues, General Buitrago and Claudette, and you summarizing the answer. I just came early today from Cartagena de Indias in Colombia, from Technovation, precisely Technovation meeting that I was invited to talk about precisely the countering of illicit trade, etc. And I invite the audience, if they would like to take a look on one of the messages or some of the messages I actually shared today in my social media, LinkedIn, you might follow me and read there what I said. But in Technovation, we were discussing precisely to have the consumer at the center of our assessment, the consumer, the human being at the center of what we are doing. If we actually don't think about the importance of protecting human rights, the importance of understanding what the consumers and users really needs, then the battle will be won by the criminal organizations. In the international arena, and it's actually connected as well with the efforts of doing, harmonized law. It is impressive to see today how the states has been given, these sovereignty powers to the multilateral entities. When we think, for example, about the World Trade Organization, when we think about the OECD, when we think about, how even at the security level, Europol, Interpol, Ameripol, etc., all these giving of powers and authorities to agencies that are outside the states, I think this is a perfect example of an emergent and innovative way to face the criminal activities. As we said, these criminal activities are cross-border, therefore they are not happening only in one market, right? So we really need to have this. And it's interesting also the triangle that you mentioned, Mauricio, because when people think about the model to counter illicit trade, they think about, okay, here is the law enforcement, here is the public sector, and here is the private sector. What we're gonna do together? Sometimes even the public sector, they only discuss without even considering the industry, without even considering the private sector. But as you precisely said, here we are not talking about the public sector and the private, we are also talking about society. So we really need to understand what the society needs in order to train them, in order to build capacities of them to make a sustainable fight and countering of the illicit phenomenon. Otherwise, we're going to have a seizure of a container of illicit tobacco in one market, but not necessarily that will solve long-term the battle. Mauricio, when I see as lawyer the Panamanian criminal code, and I see that, for example, to consider contraband in Panama, you need to comply with a threshold of $500,000 US. Imagine what could happen below that $500,000 US threshold that Panama criminal code has to consider the activity as a contraband. While in the rest of the continent, in Latin America, we are talking average 10,000, 15,000. The criminal actors knows that, and that's exactly what they do. The big vessels enter into Panama, a full container, they dismantle the container, atomize the merchandises into small boats that actually, again, abuse, the different areas in this region. That is how the phenomenon is happening, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Victor, General Buitrago and Claudette. And I think that it is important to mention on the role of the technology in the fight illicit trade and organized crime is the possibility to generate data, and also data that we can use to design new policies and new strategies against this threat. And what you mentioned, Victor, I just want to catch one specific word that was very important that you mentioned: sustainable. And this word sustainable brings us to the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, that for the first time, the United Nations included the SDG 16, that is designed to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So we are here discussing cooperation, collaboration among institutions and governments. We are discussing about how to enhance the SDG 16, and more precisely, because SDG 16 has different targets, and I just want to highlight 3 of them. That is the target 4, 5, and 6, in which says that by 2030, it must significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flow. We strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets and combat all forms of organized crime, substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms, and develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. And transparency here comes as an important perspective to conceptualize and strengthen this idea. And also the SDG 17, that is the way that to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. And here, and with the SDG 17, I just want to highlight one target, that is the target 6, that focus on enhancing North, South, 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 and triangular regional and international cooperation on and access to science, technology, and innovation, and enhance knowledge sharing on mutually agreed terms. So based on this perspective of the SDG, and since the title of this panel is centered on the landscape in Latin America of interinstitutional cooperation against illicit trade, I would like to ask to each of you the main question that was asked as part of this panel. Are we reaching a positive goal? And just to highlight to our audience that we are discussing each topics that we agreed for this panel. So are we reaching a positive goal? And Victor, I would like to start with you, please.
I'm afraid I have a sad news for the audience. We are behind. We are behind because when you see the numbers, at least in the illicit tobacco trade, we have an incidence of 30% illicit tobacco trade incidents in this region, annually talking. That means around average $6 billion US in tax losses. When you compare the Latin situation with the EU situation, you will see that in the EU you will have 8% of incidents. So therefore, I'm afraid to say that we are behind. We need to catch up. We need to catch up quickly, and that is needed in a 360 approach. We cannot talk about only brand protection programs. We cannot talk only about, a specific technology. We cannot talk only about the online marketplaces. Here, I demand an effort of every single of us in order to win this battle. We might say we are all working together, but we cannot say, no, but the multilateral system is, behind because they are not solving the crisis in the Western Europe. No, hello. We need every single effort in a 360 approach, Mauricio. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Claudette?
Well, I'm confused about the question, because I will say, are we reaching a positive goal, or are we making efforts to reach a possible goal? Because I think that the illegal trade and everything that is related to organized crime is like the concept of peace. Are we going to reach peace? Yes, we will reach peace in one territory, and what happened next day? There is war in a different territory. So I think what we have to think is in terms of, are we making efforts? Are we bringing together the different stakeholders to fight illegal trade? Are we bringing to the table platforms? Are we bringing to the table international agencies that have all the technology that can stop containers in the sea, in the frontiers where no one can reach? Can we go to territories where is the land of no one and the authorities cannot arrive there? Are we improving and helping the authorities to try to find mechanisms to arrive to those particular territories? So I think that if we put together efforts with training and educating judges, educating prosecutors, you mentioned a very important factor of fighting the corruption. So all these elements will put together a good plan. At least some territories are fighting more than others. Some countries, you will be surprised that they don't even have the recognition of IP. They don't know in their law system, they don't have a definition of counterfeiting. So, but what we're doing, I mean, if we have the tools, then we can certainly fight and have a better, country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claudette. And you just remind us that framing the question is very important. General Buitrago, please.
Thank you, Mauricio. Now, I'm totally agree with Victor and Claudette. And 3 years ago, I was working as police officers, working in a very close way with private sector. And now, as in this other field, as in the private sector, I think that authorities and private sector have to work together on the same way. So it's very important to work with the same goals. I think that authorities must be more open, and the private sector, I think that has to trust in authorities. But answering your question, I think that some countries are not aware that illicit trade is related every time with organized crime, with mafias, and with other criminal conducts. That's why we are seeing that cartels from Mexico, from Venezuela, from Brazil, from Colombia, also from other countries from Europe, are in the region, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, fighting in order to take under control the maritime ports. Homicides are growing in maritime ports, for instance, almost 40%. But I would say that we are working on the right path. If we look back 10 or 30 or 10 or 20 years ago, public and private collaboration was scarce. And perhaps there was a general assumption that governments do not need help from private actors to achieve their mission. I do believe we are now living on a moment where many public officers through Latin America and the Caribbean recognize, first, the need of collaboration with other governments as criminal networks are global nowadays. This is why intergovernmental institutions like Interpol, Europol, or Ameripol are essential, as Victor mentioned. And second, the potential and willingness of collaborating with private sector to enforce the law, that is very important. But I think that there is much more to do, but we are working on the right path. Thank you, Victor, and thank you to my colleagues.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I'm a very positive person, and I do believe in consistency. But we need to be also clear here. We are behind. Mauricio, if you allow me to answer the question in the chat box, I can answer that.
Yes, Victor. Yes, just before, I just want to mention the very interesting point General Buitrago raised about maritime ports. So, which brings a very different dimension how to protect borders. So, before concluding this panel, we have here a question in the chat. Victor, in the prosecution of crimes related to illicit trade, is it possible to include an alternative dispute resolution approach?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes, in the sense of reaching an agreement on indemnities, for example, on compensation. I have been doing that in some cases, just to achieve, again, a compensation between the victim or the damaged party and the actor, no, or the defendant. But it's more or less what we talk about what happened in torts or non-conventional obligations. Yes, of course, you might go to the ADRs, to alternative dispute resolution method. However, that is a post-event application and enforcement of the ADR. The second part of my answer will be, let's keep in mind that we are talking here about criminal or illicit or both activities, and therefore on those cases you need a sanction. You need the authority of the state to enforce the sanctions, the fines, etc. So it's a combination, might be a combination. You might use the ADRs post-event to reach compensations, for example, between the parties. And you can also, as I use it, I have been using that, for example, when you see that, okay, you reach an agreement on the destruction of the seized products, and on that end, you conciliate with the defendant in order to ensure you have a fast track in the decision to order the destruction of the seized product. This is very technical. I'm sorry for the audience, but it's super technical, legally talking. But yeah, the answer is yes. Thank you, Mauricio.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for the audience. So it was a pleasure to have you here in this panel. And I think that the richness of this panel is to have different perspectives and different approaches on how to think and argue on the same topic about illicit trade and organized crime. So thank you very much, Claudette Verneau, Victor Gueja, General Juan Carlos Buitrago, to the audience, and also to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for organizing, promoting the 24 Hours Conference on Global Organized Crime. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Good night.
Yeah. Bye.
Good night.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.